If someone had told me a year ago that my life would be completely upended by a bartender with storm gray eyes and a collection of faded tattoos, I would have laughed. A nervous, hollow sound. My life wasn't the kind that got upended. It was a carefully curated collection of quiet routines and managed expectations. Work at the library, where the silence was a comfortable blanket. Evenings in my small apartment, with my guitar and a notebook full of songs no one would ever hear. And Tuesdays. Tuesdays were my one concession to the outside world. Open mic night at the Velvet Curtain. It was a dive bar that tried to be classy, with worn-out velvet booths and lights kept strategically dim to hide the scuffs on the floor. For 2 years, I had occupied the same stool in the corner, nursing a single beer, my guitar case a silent, judgmental companion at my feet. I always played last, always a cover song, something safe. Something that wouldn't betray the frantic, fluttering thing that lived in my chest. My heart was a bird trapped in a cage of my own making, and my songs were its frantic, private heartbeat. To sing them aloud would be like performing an autopsy on myself in front of a room full of strangers. And in front of him, Julian. He was the bartender. He was also the unofficial center of gravity for the entire establishment. He moved with an economy of motion that bordered on graceful, a stark contrast to his solid frame. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a landscape of muscle and ink that I spent far too much time mapping from a distance. His face was all sharp angles and a permanent, faint scowl that wasn't aggressive, just sealed. He seemed impenetrable, a fortress. And I, with my shaking hands and my quiet songs, was a ghost haunting the periphery of his world. He never smiled. Not at me, not at anyone. He'd slide a drink across the polished wood of the bar, his expression unchanging. His eyes, the color of a gathering storm, would flick over a customer, assess, and dismiss. I was sure he saw me as just another piece of the Tuesday night furniture. The anxious guy with the guitar who always played a passable version of a song everyone already knew. The distance between us was the 10 feet of sticky floor from my stool to his bar. It felt like a canyon, an ocean. My longing for him was a constant, low-grade fever. It fueled the songs I wrote in the safety of my apartment, lyrics filled with observations he'd never know I'd made. The way a single lock of dark hair fell over his forehead when he was concentrating. The small, faded scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The intricate knot of a tattoo that disappeared beneath the collar of his black t-shirt. He was a story I was writing in my head, a song I was too terrified to sing. The professional hierarchy was clear. He was the stoic, capable man in charge of the room. I was the trembling supplicant, hoping for a single, approving nod that never came. Our interactions were minimal, transactional. Just a beer, please, he'd grunt in acknowledgement, his focus already on the next order. He never used my name. I wasn't sure he even knew it. This was my status quo, a cycle of quiet yearning, creative secrecy, and the safe, predictable pain of unrequited affection. It wasn't a happy existence, but it was mine. It was stable. And then came the Tuesday the sky broke open. The disruption of my routine began not with a bang, but with a low, ominous rumble of thunder that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. I was halfway through my usual cover, my voice wavering more than usual. The air in the bar had grown thick and heavy, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the flickering neon sign outside. Rain began to lash against the windows, first as a whisper, then a roar. It was a biblical downpour, the kind that turns streets into rivers. The lights flickered once, twice, and then, with a collective groan from the ancient wiring, they died. The bar was plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness, punctuated by the frantic blue-white flashes of lightning outside. A nervous murmur rippled through the small crowd. My song died in my throat. I could feel my heart begin its frantic, panicked drumming against my ribs. Then, a voice cut through the darkness, calm and steady. "Nobody panic. Stay put, Julian." Of course. A moment later, the warm, dancing glow of a lighter flame appeared behind the bar, followed by the soft hiss of a gas lamp igniting. He moved through the room, lighting candles on the tables, his large frame casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. He was a lighthouse in the sudden storm of my anxiety. The owner, a perpetually flustered man named Marcus, appeared from the back office, his phone held aloft as if searching for a signal that wasn't there. "Lines are dead," he announced to the room. "The street's already flooding. Nobody's going anywhere tonight." A collective sigh went through the room. For most, it was an inconvenience. For me, it was a catastrophe. My carefully constructed routine was shattered. I was trapped, forced into proximity with the one person who could unravel me with a single glance. Over the next hour, a strange, communal spirit settled over the bar. People shared stories, laughed in the flickering candlelight. I retreated further into myself, clutching my guitar like a shield. Eventually, the novelty wore off. People started to yawn, finding places to curl up in booths or on stacks of bar cushions. The storm raged on outside, a constant percussive symphony. And soon, it was just me awake and on edge, and him. Julian was behind the bar, methodically cleaning glasses by candlelight, the movements as precise and unhurried as ever. But in the soft, forgiving light, I saw things I'd never noticed before. The profound weariness etched around his eyes. He wasn't a fortress. He was just tired. I watched the muscles in his forearms flex as he polished a glass, the candlelight catching on the intricate lines of a tattoo I'd never seen clearly before, a coiled serpent, its scales rendered in exquisite detail. He looked up, and his gray eyes met mine across the dim room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I expected the usual dismissal, the blank stare, but it wasn't there. Instead, there was just quiet observation. "You gonna sit there all night, looking like a startled rabbit?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of its usual clipped, professional edge. I swallowed, my throat dry. I don't know what else to do." He let out a sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire night. He set the glass down. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the back room. "Marcus has some old blankets in storage. Might as well make ourselves useful." My feet felt like lead, but I followed him. The storage room was small and smelled of stale beer and dust. He pulled a chain, and a single, bare bulb flickered to life, powered by a backup generator I hadn't known existed. He pointed to a high shelf. "Up there." He reached, his t-shirt riding up to expose a sliver of skin above his jeans. My eyes darted away, a flush of heat creeping up my neck. He grunted, his fingers just brushing the edge of the dusty pile. "Can't quite." "Here, give me a hand." He stepped down, gesturing for me to hold the small stepladder steady. I did, my hands gripping the cool metal, my gaze fixed on the floor. He climbed up again. This time, he managed to snag a thick wool blanket, pulling it down. It tumbled, along with two others, in a cascade of dust and forgotten history. I stumbled back, trying to catch them. He hopped down from the ladder at the same moment. We collided. Not hard, just a soft, clumsy bumping of bodies in a cramped space. His hand shot out to steady me, his fingers wrapping around my upper arm. The first touch. It wasn't accidental, not really. It was reflexive, protective. But for me, it was a lightning strike. Heat bloomed where his fingers pressed against my thin sweater, a searing, terrifying warmth that spread through my entire body. My heart didn't just flutter, it stalled. I could feel the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. It lasted only a second. He dropped his hand as if he'd been burned, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Sorry," he muttered, turning to gather the blankets from the floor. "It's fine," I whispered, my voice a strained thread of sound. The air between us had changed. It was thick now, heavy with unspoken things. We carried the blankets back into the main room, the silence of physical weight. We distributed them to the few sleeping forms, moving like conspirators in the dim light. I was acutely aware of him, of the space he occupied, of the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin. I retreated to my corner, pulling a blanket around my shoulders, preparing to wait out the night in my usual state of anxious solitude. But Julian didn't go back behind the bar. He pulled a stool over, setting it down a few feet from me, and sat. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. The candlelight carved shadows into the planes of his face, making him look both older and more vulnerable. "So," he said, his voice low, "the quiet guy with the sad songs, it wasn't a question. It was an observation. They're not all sad." I mumbled, defensive. "No," he agreed, his gaze steady on me. "Just safe." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Safe. It was the word I used to build the walls of my life. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "The covers," he said. "They're good. You're good. But it's like you're singing from behind a sheet of glass." My stomach twisted. He saw it. He saw right through me. The power dynamic, which had always felt so tilted in his favor, was suddenly shifting. He wasn't the imposing bartender. He was just a man, sitting in the dark, asking for something real. He was showing me a vulnerability I never would have expected. He was asking for my help, in a way. Help to break the monotony of the night, perhaps. Help to understand the quiet man in the corner. "You got anything that's not behind glass?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Anything that's actually yours?" My notebook felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my gig bag. It was full of songs that were mine. Songs about loneliness. Songs about fear. Songs about a bartender with storm gray eyes. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain. The storm provided the perfect excuse. The world outside was chaos, a maelstrom of wind and water. Inside this candlelit bubble, the normal rules didn't seem to apply. This place, the velvet curtain, was my stage, but it had never felt like my space. Tonight it did. The sleeping patrons, the dim lighting, the roar of the storm creating a shield against the rest of the world. It was an intimate setting, forged by chance. Julian didn't press. He just waited, his patience a surprising, unnerving thing. He wasn't looking at me with dismissal anymore. He was looking at me with genuine curiosity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner beating against the bars. This is it. The thought was a terrifying whisper in my mind. This is the moment you either break the glass or you suffocate behind it. My hand was shaking as I unzipped my guitar case. The familiar weight of the acoustic guitar in my lap was a small comfort, an anchor in the swirling sea of my anxiety. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I focused on my fingers, positioning them on the fretboard. The calluses on my fingertips felt foreign, clumsy. "There's one song," I said, my voice tight. "It's not finished a lie." It was the most finished, most painfully complete thing I had ever written. I took a breath, a ragged, insufficient gulp of the heavy air. And then I played. The first few chords were hesitant, quiet. But the melody was so ingrained in my muscle memory that my fingers moved on their own, finding their way through the familiar patterns. The song was called Lighthouse, a ridiculously earnest title, I knew. But it was the only word that fit. The confession began with the first line. "There's a man behind a wall of glass and wood, and he moves like the tide." My voice was thin at first, a fragile thing in the vast silence of the room. I sang about watching him from a distance, about the imagined stories behind his scars and his tattoos, about the way the light caught in his hair. And his eyes are the calm in the center of the storm, a color I've never known. It was a verbal unveiling, a lyrical striptease of every secret observation, every foolish, hidden feeling I had harbored for 2 years. My cheeks were burning. My stomach was a knot of pure terror. This was emotional suicide. I risked a glance at him. Just a quick one. He hadn't moved. He was leaning forward still, his elbows on his knees, but his posture was rigid. His gaze was fixed on me, intense and unwavering. He wasn't scowling. He wasn't laughing. He was just listening, really listening. The realization gave me a surge of desperate courage. I poured everything into the final verse. All the longing, all the loneliness, all the pathetic, beautiful hope. And I'm a ship lost in the fog, just hoping for a sign, a single beam of light from the lighthouse to prove that he sees me. The final chord hung in the air, vibrating, shimmering, before fading into the sound of the rain. Silence. A silence so profound, so heavy, it felt like I was at the bottom of the ocean. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared at my hands, at the strings of my guitar, waiting for the verdict. waiting for the laughter, the scorn, the pity. He finally moved. He pushed himself off his stool and walked toward me. Each footstep was a hammer blow to my already shattered nerves. He stopped right in front of me. I had to tilt my head back to look at him, my guitar still clutched in my lap like a useless shield. His expression was one I had never seen before. It was stripped bare of all its usual defenses. I saw shock. I saw confusion. And underneath it all, I saw a terrifying, unmistakable vulnerability that mirrored my own. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment in the air between us. Then, slowly, gently, he rested his hand on the neck of my guitar, his fingers brushing against mine. Another jolt, stronger this time. He leaned down, his face close to mine. I could smell the faint scent of rain and coffee on him. "Did you mean it?" He whispered, his voice rough. "Any of it?" I could only nod, my throat completely closed. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a tremor through my entire body. "Leo," he said. He said my name, for the first time, and the sound of it on his lips was enough to break me. He leaned in closer, and the world narrowed to the space between our faces. The first kiss wasn't frantic or passionate. It was slow, hesitant, questioning. His lips were softer than I could have ever imagined. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and fear and a desperate, fragile hope. It was a silent conversation, an answer to a question I hadn't even realized I'd asked with my song. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. His storm-gray eyes were dark, searching. "I see you," he whispered. And then the glass wall I had lived behind for so long finally, completely shattered. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time seemed to have dissolved along with my defenses. Eventually, the exhaustion of the night, both emotional and physical, caught up to us. He led me to one of the velvet booths, and I curled up on the worn seat, using my jacket as a pillow. He draped a second blanket over me, his hand lingering for a moment on my shoulder. I fell asleep to the sound of the rain and the steady rhythm of his breathing from the booth across from mine. It was the first time in years I had felt completely, utterly safe. I woke to the jarring intrusion of sunlight. Bright, unforgiving morning light streamed through the bar's windows. The storm was over. For a moment, I was disoriented, the memory of a night before feeling hazy, like a dream. Then all came rushing back. The song, the kiss. My stomach clenched with a familiar, sickening lurch of anxiety. I sat up, my heart pounding. I was alone. The bar was quiet, empty of the other stranded patrons. The blankets were neatly folded on a nearby table. My guitar case was propped safely against the wall. It was all too neat, too orderly. Then I heard a sound from behind the bar. The clink of a ceramic mug. Julian. He was there, his back to me, wearing a clean t-shirt. He was moving with his usual efficiency, wiping down the counter. The morning after anxiety hit me like a physical blow. My mind, my worst enemy, began its vicious spiral. It was a mistake, a trick of the candlelight and the storm. He regretted it. He was embarrassed. He probably thought I was a pathetic, lovesick fool. The intimacy of the night had evaporated with the morning dew, leaving behind a cold, awkward reality. He turned, and his eyes met mine. The warmth was gone. The vulnerability was gone. The fortress was back, the walls rebuilt higher and stronger than ever before. "Coffee's on," he said, his voice flat, professional. He gestured with his chin toward a coffee pot on the counter. No ismite, no acknowledgement of what had passed between us. Nothing. The silence was a chasm. My former solitude, the one I had cultivated for years, had felt like a quiet room. This new solitude, this sudden absence of the connection I had so briefly felt, was a vacuum. It was suffocating. "Thanks," I mumbled, my voice hoarse. I grabbed my things, my movements clumsy with shame and hurt. I couldn't look at him. I fled from a bar like a criminal, not even bothering with the coffee. The walk home was a blur of self-recrimination. "Stupid. You're so stupid, Leo. You broke your own rules. You sang the song. You showed him the broken, messy truth of you, and he was repulsed." The next few days were agonizing. I went through the motions of my life: work, home, practice, but everything felt gray and muted. The memory of his kiss was a brand on my lips, a constant reminder of my foolishness. Tuesday rolled around again, a day I now dreaded. The thought of going back to the velvet curtain, of facing him, was unbearable. But the thought of not going, of letting him think he had chased me away, was somehow worse. It felt like surrender. So I went. My hand shook so badly I could barely tune my guitar. I took my usual stool in the corner and ordered my usual beer. He served me without a word, without even making eye contact. He moved around the bar, all business, laughing at a joke one of the regulars told, polishing glasses, completely and utterly ignoring my existence. The period of silence was absolute. He had erased me. He had erased the storm, the song, the kiss. It had meant nothing. When my turn came to play, I almost backed out, but I forced myself onto the small stage. I played a cover, the safest, most soulless song I knew. My voice was weak, my fingers clumsy on the strings. It was awful. I didn't look in his direction once. As soon as I finished, I packed up my guitar and left, not even finishing my beer. I decided then that I was done. Done with the velvet curtain. Done with open mic nights. Done with foolish, impossible hopes. The solitude was better. Safer. The following Tuesday, I stayed home. I sat on my couch with my guitar in my lap, but I couldn't play. The songs felt like ashes in my mouth. Around 10 o'clock, just when I would have been getting ready to play my set, there was a knock on my apartment door. My building was secure. No one ever knocked on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole, and my world stopped. It was Julian, standing in the hallway of my apartment building. He looked wrong, out of place. He wasn't wearing his usual black bartender's attire. He was in a gray hoodie, his hands shoved into his pockets, and he looked just as nervous as I felt. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze fixed on my door as if he was trying to see through it. This was the return. The confrontation I had both dreaded and desperately craved. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. He looked startled, as if he hadn't actually expected me to answer. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hi." I managed to squeak out. An awkward silence stretched between us. "You weren't there tonight," he said, stating the obvious. I was busy, a pathetic lie. He nodded, his eyes dropping to the floor. "Right." He looked up again, and in the harsh, fluorescent light of my hallway, I saw the same vulnerability I had seen in the candlelight. He was just as scared as I was. "Can I?" He gestured vaguely toward my apartment. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for a second, then stepped back, opening the door wider. He walked in, his large frame seeming to shrink the small space of my living room. He looked around at my stacks of books, my messy sheet music, the guitar stand in the corner. It felt like he was seeing the blueprint of my soul, and I had a sudden urge to cover everything with a sheet. "I'm an idiot," he said, finally, turning to face me. The words were blunt, unadorned. The clarifying conversation had begun. "I freaked out," he continued, running a hand through his hair. "That morning, I woke up, and I didn't know what to do." He looked at me, his gray eyes pleading for understanding. "No one's ever done that before," he said, his voice dropping. "Written a song about me." He shook his head, a humorless smile twisting his lips. "No one's ever looked at me and seen a lighthouse. They see the bartender, the bouncer, the guy with the tattoos. They don't see me." My heart ached for him. "Your song," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was like you reached right into my chest and saw everything. And it terrified me. This was his confession, his fear, his insecurity. The strong, silent man was a facade, a carefully constructed shield, just like my cover songs. "So I put the walls back up," he admitted, his gaze full of regret. "It's what I do. It's easier. Safer." There was that word again. Safe. We were two sides of the same, terrified coin. "I was a coward, Leo. I hurt you. And I'm sorry. I thought you regretted it." I whispered, the words I'd been torturing myself with all week. The kiss, he took a step closer to me. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I didn't regret the kiss. I regretted being a coward about it." He reached out, not to touch me, but just holding his hand in the space between us. "An offering. This," he said, gesturing between the two of us. This is new territory for me. I'm not good at it. I don't have the words. You have all the words. You put them in songs. He took another step. He was so close now, I could feel the heat radiating from him. But I want to be, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. I want to be good at this. With you, my breath hitched. This was more than I had ever allowed myself to hope for. I came here tonight to ask you to come back, he said. It was a symbolic gesture, not just to the bar, but to him, to us. I want to hear that song again, he said, a faint, genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. I want to hear all of them. The ones behind the glass, and the ones that aren't. He finally closed the distance between us, his hand coming to rest gently on the side of my face. His thumb stroked my cheekbone. Is that okay? He asked. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender, and nodded. Okay, I whispered. The new beginning didn't start with a flash of lightning or a grand declaration. It started quietly, tentatively. It started with him staying for a cup of tea, sitting on my worn-out couch, and telling me the stories behind his tattoos. It started with me playing him another song, one I'd written about the color gray, my voice shaking but clear. A few weeks later, I was back on the stage at the Velvet Curtain. The lights felt a little warmer. The room felt a little smaller. From my vantage point on the stage, I could see Julian behind the bar. He wasn't polishing glasses or taking orders. He was leaning against the back counter, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on me. And he was smiling. A real, small, private smile that was just for me. I took a breath. This is a new one, I said into the microphone. It's called The Morning After, and I sang. Later that night, we were back in my apartment. A comfortable, easy silence settled between us as I made coffee. This was our new routine, a domestic intimacy that felt more profound and real than any passionate kiss. He came and stood behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder as I waited for the coffee to brew. I leaned back against his solid warmth, closing my eyes. The frantic bird in my chest was finally calm. It wasn't fluttering. It was nesting. I used to think my life was a fixed story, a quiet narrative I had written for myself out of fear. My routines, my solitude, my secret songs, they were my armor. But Julian was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the disruption that didn't break me, but broke me open. He didn't save me from my solitude. He walked into it, listened to its quietest, most frightened song, and then showed me how to build a door. He taught me that the bravest thing you can ever do is sing your truth, even if your voice shakes. Because sometimes the one person you're meant to sing it for is listening. It makes me wonder, have you ever taken a risk that completely changed the story you thought you were living? Let me know your own stories of bravery in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about finding your voice and your person, don't forget to subscribe.